There we go. Over to you, Duncan.
Hi, so good afternoon, folks. Let me just see if I can get my slides up on screen. Now, I lose the ability to see you at this point, so I don't know, can we get a thumbs up, or can get, just to make sure that everyone can see this okay? I'm assuming that's okay then. So good afternoon. Just to quickly pass on my regards to Maggie and Tabby, of course, from DGU Limited.
Sorry, Duncan, hold on a second. Have you started to share? Because I'm not seeing.
I have, yes. Is that not? Let me just try that again. No problem. I was saying to Maggie earlier the joys of technology, and technology fails. So we'll try that one more time. And
no,
no, hang on. Let me just.
Moment, Irene Patterson's sharing her screen. Irene, could you stop sharing your screen, please? I think that's why Duncan's not able to share his.
How's that working?
No, Duncan, if you just wait a minute.
Yeah, no problem.
I could see you before, but not now. Oh, that's it.
That's it.
Oh, sorry, can I just also, it's been a little while since we've done a Zoom. I should have reminded you that we have a chat facility, which is at the bottom of your screen. So any questions, anything you want to ask throughout the performance, just add it to chat, and then we'll be able to go through that at the end. So apologies for forgetting to mention that. Okay, right, Duncan.
Okay, Duncan, yeah, we can see your presentation. We're good to go.
Great, fantastic. So as I say, just to quickly to pass my thanks on to Tabby and Maggie. My name is Duncan Bremner. I work as the Development Officer for Voluntary Arts Scotland. So my background is as a self-employed artist in various positions in museums and galleries and in education. I've been working with grassroots arts projects in Edinburgh and in Scotland and in Europe for over 20 years now. And just about every one of those roles has involved some element of fundraising. So it's an important part of the sector and something that's certainly worth getting your head around. So a little bit about voluntary arts. Voluntary Arts Scotland is part of voluntary arts. I've been working across the UK and Ireland for almost 30 years now. We seek to promote and increase participation in creative cultural activities. And we do that in a number of ways. Initially, by building strong connections and relationships, by demonstrating how taking part improves social connectedness, and by talking about space, which I think is probably going to become increasingly important to us all, given our current restrictions. So we're here today to look at fundraising for beginners. And also just to say, I'm going to be able to share this presentation, and as Maggie and Tabby have said, this is also being recorded. So don't worry too much about taking notes. You may need a pen and a paper halfway through, but I'm happy if you're listening just now. That's fantastic. So where to begin? As we've kind of already said, most people find fundraising a bit of a dark art. It can be intimidating, and if you're new to this, a little bit scary. So the important lesson is that successful funding applications don't happen overnight. Achieving your best case for support will require not only a good idea. In some ways, good ideas are easy to get hold of, but they also require the research. Obviously, the internet's a wonderful tool. Go and speak to people and ask them how they work, and look at where money comes from other projects and think about whether you might be able to apply for them as well. It also involves a lot of planning, both for yourself, but also understanding what timelines are for potential funders. Realistically, most funders take about 3 months to make a decision. Some are a little bit quicker, some are a little bit longer. But you also have to think about who your audience might be, who participants in your project might be, and how your project can have the best impact for them. You might take several attempts at writing something. So time for drafting is important, and if you're anything like me, certainly time to throw everything in the bin and start again a few times occasionally. And editing, i.e. tweaking or altering what you have written. This process will involve effort and can take time. However, if you want to scale up your activities, you need to think about fundraising. So where to begin? As with all the best Hollywood or even Bollywood films, it can be a bit of a journey. But along the way, you should do some important things. First of all, you need to share. You need to share with critical friends, colleagues and supporters. In fact, anyone and everyone who will listen. Eventually, you'll start to build up a few trusted advisor. But I started getting my mum and dad to read things, and my family members, my sister particularly, was great at giving me just the right level of feedback that I needed. You need to listen to what your friends and colleagues say, and you need to adapt what you've written in light of that. But what's really important to remember is that your voice must be clear. Everyone has a slightly different way of approaching things, and there is no right or wrong. What funders are interested in is your voice. And there's a point in there about authenticity. If something doesn't ring true, then people are already suspicious. So don't try and write like a lawyer if you're not a lawyer. Voice and your voice is important within this. So where to begin? I've split this next section up into 3 key questions. These are questions you'll have to answer in almost every funding application or funding process. And it's really important that you keep asking yourself these questions as you go along. Number 1, what do you want to do? It seems obvious, doesn't it? But communication's key. You've got to tell a compelling story, and perhaps that's not that surprising. But it also needs to be engaging, and you need to be clear about what your story is. The other important thing is that details also matter. The next question is, what do you need? Is it materials? Is it time? Is it space? You need to let a funder know what you want and also why you need it. You also need to get that organised. So we'll touch on supporting materials as well. And what else do you need to know? This is a bit of a catch-all, but depending on the funder, you may need to know about benefits, you may need to know about partnerships, and what is important is making sure that your fundraising is legal and ethical, and where to go if there is a problem. So remember, cash might be tight, but funders also need to spend their money. This is their job. They want to support the best value projects judged by whatever criteria they are using. Your job is to highlight how you can deliver the best outcomes for them and also for everyone else involved in the project, including yourself. So I'm going to intersperse this talk with a couple of handy hints. I've been trying to find some bad clip art, but I kind of drew blank with that. I've got a few worked examples, and we'll look at different types of fundraising there, and at least one activity for you. So as I said earlier, if you have a pen or a notepad handy, that would be useful. So looking at the first question, what do you want to do? Amongst other things, just about every funding application or process will ask you to describe what it is that you want to do. This is the opportunity to make your case. Overall, you need to tell a compelling story. You don't have to be a famous author or like J.K. Rowling or Roald Dahl to tell a compelling story. We all do it every day, whether it's on social media or with family and friends. Narrative is everything, and being creative with that narrative is key to fundraising. As with many things in life, it's all about the story you tell and the language you use. So it might seem strange, but think about fundraising like you're telling a story to a friend or a colleague. Maybe not your best friend, and maybe not a colleague that you work with every day, but certainly somebody that you can talk to in a unthreatening way. And as with all stories, you need to be engaging. If your story is dull or long-winded or overtly complicated, your reader isn't going to be that interested. Your story needs to connect emotionally, and sometimes it needs to connect intellectually as well. But if your readers can't relate to your story, then they're less likely to support it. And you also need to give enough detail. And kind of by the first point, you need to do this without your reader losing interest. So for instance, you don't just list 20 things, you give the top 3 and you move on. So if you can tell your story and show how, with your funders' help, the story can be completed to the satisfaction of all, you will eventually succeed. So a few tips, a few hard-earned tips, I should say, in terms of writing a compelling funding story. And the first one is, it's not that exciting. It is about doing your homework. You've got to do the legwork first. Find out what the funder has supported in the past, read any background information you can. For instance, look at the annual report to the organisation, and read all the guidance that's produced, and do that twice. Remember to note any important points such as deadlines. They can be at 12 o'clock lunchtime or 12 o'clock midnight. And I have to say that's quite important, and I have been caught out with it in the past. Sometimes there'll be somebody you can talk to directly if you have any questions, so give them a call if you can. Normally, at the very least, there'll be somebody you can email. So it's good to try and establish a relationship with your funder, and we'll try and look at that a little bit more later. So if you do have any questions, go and ask. Think about your audience as well. Who are you asking support from? What is it they do, and what might they want in return? It's important that you think about the language that they're using to describe that, and how you might incorporate some of that, at least some of that, into your writing. So if your funder talks about audience, talk about audience. If your funder talks about participants, talk about participants. If they're interested in something exciting, make what you do exciting. There's a little bit of what I would call kind of language mirroring here, but it's important that you're not just giving them back exactly the same phrases, that you actually put some of that in your own voice as well. The next thing, de-junk your language. Generally speaking, the arts are terrible for trying to describe what it is they do. You don't become a painter because you're good at writing. And likewise, this is not literary criticism. Don't make things more complicated than necessary. And a personal bugbear of mine, don't use acronyms unless you've actually explained them first. You might be a specialist in your area and used to describing something in a certain way, but frequently the people who are going to be reading your applications aren't. So they need to be able to understand what it is that you're talking about. Keep it simple, or keep it simple stupid, the KISS theory. Excessive detail, and as I mentioned, too much drama or obvious exaggeration. You can make your writing or your ask more entertaining, but this will not necessarily make it more compelling. And what we're trying to do is to create a compelling funding story. And also, don't assume anything. Clearly state why you're applying, what the current situation is, and what the desired outcomes will be. And as with all good stories, starting from the beginning and telling your story is important. So, as I've said, I do have some handy hints to go with this. Handy hints, no bad clip art. Always remember, answer the question. This is a really basic thing, but it's really easy when you're enthusiastic about a project to talk about the project and not necessarily answer the question. Funders expect you to answer the questions they ask. And it's important that you do that first and then talk about how good your project is afterwards. Another little handy hint, always remember, consider your words. Don't just throw them in there willy-nilly. The right words will help add meaning to your story. For instance, a title. An example I came across the last couple of weeks was a project called the Cognac. We subsequently learned that cognac is a Scottish traveller word for the act of imbuing a song or story with your soul. Now, for me, that just has poetry, and my mind starts to expand and think of all the possibilities within that. Now, if they just called that workshops with Scottish gyps or travellers, I might not have been that interested, but they've given me a little hook, a little bit of narrative, and I want to learn more. So again, it's all about the story. Positive tone is also important. You never put "we can" or you always, should I say, you put "you can" or "you will do this," not "you might do this." If you don't have faith in your project, how can you expect a funder to have faith? So being positive and sometimes being relentlessly positive in how you describe something is really important. So back to our 3 key questions. We've touched on the importance of telling a story. And in most questions, most applications, you're likely to be asked several other questions that will then allow you to expand on your story. So as a second part of this question, what do you want to do? I put this in brackets, and why is it important? So again, that's the question you have to answer. And for that matter, you have to remember that details are important. You need to be able to communicate them to your funders or supporters. So this will probably include how the project will be delivered and by whom. For instance, who's leading it and what experience do they bring, why your team is good and is capable of delivering the project. The benefits of the project. It's not always just about running a good creative thing. Benefit to you, to others, or to the sector is really important to funders. Now, this can include who gets employed, who has a chance to be part of it as an audience or a participant, and any other advantages, you know, if there's health and well-being outcomes, if there's an element of trying to support your community, particularly as troubled times, that's important. And in shorthand terms, the more benefits there is, the more value the project will have to a funder. So we'll touch on benefit again later. The numbers involved, how many workshops you're going to do, who you're going to be working with, how many people might attend. If you're not sure, you can always put in expressions like approximate or an estimated or for example, but being as specific as you can is important for a funder. But again, having a slight kind of catch-all is useful when you're writing applications. Also, what others think. Making your case is a many-layered process. The appropriate quotes from participants or others in the sector can be just as powerful and sometimes more powerful than just descriptive text. So communicate not just what you think, but what other people think as well. And any other supporting evidence. What's unique about your place, both good and bad. If your project is about this, then you also need to communicate that. For instance, is there high crime or is there low employment? I'd recommend your local council or Scottish Government data can be a source of that information. And I've personally found that a combination of a compelling story and a good evidence for need is a key combination when you're funding projects. Outside of my work for Voluntary Arts, the last project I was involved in was looking at women's history, and we were able to identify lots of problems in my local community about social isolation, particularly for young mums. So running art projects with free childcare would be the way to get around that. Gives the mum an opportunity to get out the house and also to connect with other people in the same situation. You know, it wasn't that difficult to find the evidence, and it wasn't that difficult working with some key partners to find people saying that this is something that they think they would enjoy doing. So supporting evidence can be make or break when it comes to making a case. So there's a lot in there, as I say. I'm quite happy to share this presentation, which will also include my notes, but just to come back to a few handy hints again. Always remember, words count. It's hard, but funders don't want to read pages and pages of text. Normally, applications or the process of making a funding application, you'll have to fill in lots of text boxes. Generally speaking, they will have a character count or a word count, and that's really quite important. The difference is significant in terms of how you describe your project. So again, that should be in the guiding documents, and always check which it is. You can go over if there isn't a word count, an actual physical limit, but remember not to do that more than, my rule of thumb, about 10%. Funders don't want to read pages and pages of text. They have a lot of applications, so cut to the chase. So we've created a compelling story, and we've had the opportunity to expand on that with a little bit of detail. Now we make our ask. What is it that you need? You clearly need to articulate what you're asking for and why support from a funder will help you complete that story. It can feel unnatural, even awkward, and sometimes, as we've discussed, a wee bit scary, but remember, that's what a funder is there for. If you've told your story well, then people should want to support you. So here's a few tips for making your ask, whether it's materials, time, or space. Be ambitious, but realistic. Remember, this is a risk for a funder. They want to see that you're a safe pair of hands. If you've not had support before, asking for hundreds of thousands of pounds can be a bit of a big ask, but remember, be ambitious, but try and start small and build. Try running a pilot project first, for instance. Be specific in your ask. Vagueness doesn't grab anyone's attention. As with your story, you need to clearly articulate what it is that you want and why. I guess you have to remember that not every funding ask is about money, and particularly money for you. You could be looking for support in kind. This could be approaching a commercial sponsor who might be able to donate some materials or some space or some office costs. But also it's worthwhile looking for other kinds of support, like you might be able to get a support mentor or for a workshop, and for you and your development that can be just as valuable. If you are asking for materials, equipment or services, then it's probably good practice to get some quotes. Certainly anything over £1,000. I don't think that at that stage has to be formal, particularly for smaller applications, but it shows that you're going to get good value for supporters. That can be as simple as phoning around and checking with a couple of suppliers. But remember, that can take time to organise. And spread the risk. So that's quite a big one. Some supporters want to see that their other sources of money have been found and they're not going to be the only ones who are going to back a project. For them, this is about risk mitigation and sharing responsibility. For you, this can be as simple as looking to find some supporting. Oh, not what happened there. We lose people for a moment. Are we okay?
No, the screen sharing seems to have stopped for me.
Let me just try and dip into that again. I don't know if that was on a time limit or something. That seems a little strange.
No, it is. It doesn't usually do that. It just jumped out for some reason. There might have been a. There we go.
There we go. And presenter view. There we go. All good?
Yeah.
Yep.
Great. So yes, as I say, spreading the risk is quite a kind of big thing. For funders, it's about mitigating that risk. For you, it can be quite simple. It just might be some support in kind for materials or running costs, or a little bit more complex where you're either putting some of your own money in or you're going to other funders. It's obviously worth looking at platforms such as Kickstarter or even simpler, and I'd always try to bear that in mind, keep it simple, looking for donations. In other times, I would have suggested tombolas or stalls at event. But always remember, if you're running free events, always have a way for people to donate to you. If you're going out and enjoying a bit of theatre in the park, then you won't mind if somebody comes around with a bucket and you can always say no. So, handy hints time again. Always remember, don't oversell. Not everything needs to be stratospheric all the time. This is harder to gauge, but overselling and equally underselling your time and skills can be a risk. Wanting the best project for a limited budget is certainly something I can be guilty of, but you have to be realistic. And remember, the costs and times have to be appropriate to the project, and supporters, particularly professional funders, know what things cost. So don't be tempted to try and squeeze too much out of a project, and don't be tempted to give too much of your time. So I promised you at least one interactive session. So I've got a little exercise here which we can have a shot at. I'm calling it Your Compelling Story. the elevator pitch. For those of you who aren't familiar, from Wikipedia, an elevator pitch, elevator speech, or elevator statement, a short description of an idea or product or company that explains the concept in such a way that any listener can understand it in a short period of time. I'm sure we'll all be familiar, certainly in my head, there's a Hollywood movie maker pitching an idea to an executive as they travel in a lift from one meeting to another. But it's a very good idea, and it is that if you can't tell your story in a minute or in a couple of sentences, then it's probably not worth telling. What we're going to need to do today is I'm going to give you 5 minutes, and I'd like you to do me 3 or 4 sentences or around 30 seconds of talking, and we'll look at this at the end of the presentation, about a project, a real or imaginary project. And I want you to think about how you communicate things. What do you want to do? What do you need for your project? And one important detail about it. So I'm going to come out of the slideshow just now. And I'll stop sharing just for a few minutes. And it's now 2:31 by my watch. So if we took 5 minutes now, is that okay with everyone? And yeah, we'll come back to this at the end, as you may want to do a little bit of editing as we go through the second half. So I'm going to repeat that again. We're looking for a project, real or imaginary. You can give it a title if you want. That might be quite useful. You need to communicate a couple of things, namely what you want to do, what you need to do it, and one important detail. So we'll listen to these pitches at the end of your presentation. It can be about a project you've got in your mind just now, or it can be something entirely imaginary. I'm going to carry on talking, probably just annoying you rather than keeping you entertained. But it's a really good discipline to get into. I don't always do this at the start of a project, or at the start of a funding application, but normally by about halfway through, I have to try and distill down what I'm writing to 2 or 3 sentences to communicate that. Now, that has a number of uses. The first one is if you're going to talk to any press, if you're going to try and publicize what you're doing, you've already got a little bit of copy. First of all, initially it goes into a funding application, or it goes online, or it's how I talk about the project to other people I'm trying to get involved. But then it's useful if I need to speak to the press. There's a third thing about once you've got that story, you can then expand on it. You can bolt on the bits, and depending who you're talking to, you can bolt on different bits. And again, that's important. Not every funder is interested in the same thing, but the core of whatever your story is has to make sense, has to be something you can communicate. So that's a really useful skill to have. So we've now got another couple of minutes. I kind of think this is going to be a little bit like Dragon's Den, where I'll be batting off investment opportunities left, right, and centre. So just to recap one more time, we need to know what you want to do in your project, what you need to do it, and an important detail. Your project can be real or imaginary, and you can give it a title. So we've got 1 more minute to go. This might be the moment to stretch, stand up, turn around. I appreciate there's a lot of information. It can be a little bit of a brain dump, these sorts of sessions, but hopefully you're going to find it useful. And I might just start the screen sharing again.
Duncan, just tell me when you want me to put everyone's mics back on so that.
Certainly, that's fine. I mean, we've probably got another 10 minutes of
Okay,
chat,
that's cool.
and then we can come back to it. As I think it Tabby, or was it Maggie, you said there is a chat function in the in Zoom. So if there's any questions you want, bung it in there, and we can certainly come back to that at the end. Okay, so hopefully we'll have some exciting projects or funding opportunities coming up at the end. Now, a lot of my experience has been fundraising through applications to trusts or to national bodies or to other organisations. But of course, there are lots of different ways to get support for your project. And I thought we could look at a couple of worked examples. I might just mention, if I can find to this stage, some of our worked examples come from a book which Voluntary Arts produce called Cash for Culture. And I'd recommend this as a kind of follow-up to this workshop. There's more opportunity in this to go into the details of things like becoming a charity or the different kind of funding organisations that there are out there. But I thought we could look at a couple of worked examples that have been taken for this. And one of them starts with a colleague of mine, Morven Cunningham, who runs started off as a festival called Lethal 8. Morven has also been involved in a lot of the murals that appear in Leith. And this was their first mural, which I think was done for a very small amount of money. But one way they got the most out of their budget was looking at in-kind support from a local paint manufacturer called Johnston's. So Morven approached them, and Johnston's was happy to help. They had professional painters would return kind of half-empty cans of paint to them for disposal, and of course paint goes out of date, so they'd rather use that productively, and particularly for something that's a good local project, and that she could sell to the manager, to the local manager, who was more than happy to support them. So the money that was saved could go on to other parts of the project, but it also bought a lot of really good local buy-in, particularly you know, the paint shop could tell some of their clients that they had supported this, and also you know, a little bit of marketing, a little bit of advertising for them. It's no bad thing. Another worked example, funding from trusts and foundations. Now you have to be a charity or a registered community organisation, but this is an example of a storytelling centre who was awarded a relatively modest sum from the Bank of Scotland Foundation, and they were telling stories and working with young people in residential care. Unfortunately, only photographed as them working with older folks, excuse me. But I thought the little quote that they put was really quite useful. They talk about story, of course, but you can see why the tone that they use might be something that a banking foundation would be interested in. So, you know, stories are what happened to us, they're what we do, and they're who we are and who we want to be. There's something quite aspirational about that, and you could see that might be quite appealing to a foundation who want to help young people. Another example, this is corporate giving. Grassroots, who collected donations in Morrisons in Dalkeith, again, reasonably local to me, As most people will be familiar, most supermarkets, not just Morrison's, have a community champion. And if you know somebody who works in the shop, you can help them, and they can help organise either donations, which can be cash as well, or they can facilitate you fundraising in the store. And again, you could see why grassroots might be appealing to Morrison's. If a band's going to come along and play in a supermarket, that's entertaining for everyone. So again, that is a good fit. Crowdfunding is another one. And I think what we can see by this story, which again, I thought was interesting, Whale Arts, again, based in Edinburgh, they were looking for money to develop a social event, and for equipment, and to maybe reach a little bit out to some other groups in other parts of the world. But crowdfunding does tend to be almost like a ticketed process. So for £5 you get something, for £10 you get something better, and for £20 you get something better again. So there's almost a little bit of an exchange about it, but that's a very good way to make people come and donate to you. So we've got 3 key questions. What do you want to do? Tell a compelling story. And our stories from those was that one group wanted to produce an artwork, another one wanted to work with younger folk, and a third wanted to entertain shoppers, and the fourth had a kind of sold a product, or sold fun things. But each of them told a story that was appropriate to the funder, and each of them had some details in those stories. And again, I think details matter. What do you need? I think they all made a clear request for an offer, something that was quite simple to understand. And again, that's an important part of the narrative. And so our second part of the second question, supporting materials. What do you need? So as with the rest of your application, any additional information you have can significantly impact the way a supporter views your case. My advice to you is spend some time in your budget and be realistic in your costs, and remember that your budget is another way to tell your story. If you have a good amount of money for something in your budget, then that's a way to show it's important to you and your project, and vice versa. So there's no point talking about participation, let's say, in your project if you haven't got a budget line for participation to actually pay for it. If you're trying to get your story over or your project over to a lot of people, you have to have some kind of marketing budget in there. So entire workshops could be run on budget, so I'm not going to dwell too much on that today. However, if you struggle, my best bit of advice is to find a friend or ask a colleague. There are some rules of thumb. So if in doubt, you can always go and ask a funder what their advice is. Don't be shy. You don't get anything if you don't ask. Timelines can be important. As I said, normally have to give about 3 months for a funder to make a decision. But you can think about how long you plan your activities to be, how long it's going to take to deliver all your parts. You've got to remember to include some time for reporting. It's normally a legal part of receiving money from somebody. You might also want to think about asking for their support again, so it's a good opportunity to try and build a relationship. Quotes for costs. Again, we touched on this. This shows more than anything else that you're going to get good value for your supporters. Anything over 1K should be price checked. You can refer to union rates or sector averages if you know them. Anything over 10K should probably be tendered for, i.e. 3 quotes or advertised. Now again, that's probably a legal requirement for a charity. You may not have to do that if you're a sole trader, but again, the more evidence you can show that you've thought about value for money, the more any kind of supporter is going to be interested. Supporting material, films or photographs. It is a bit of a cliche, but a picture really is worth 1,000 words, but they have to be high quality. This will, first of all, demonstrate your professionalism and also can speak more powerfully than your text alone. CVs or a management statement or details of your board or your steering group. This could also be good feedback from attendees or a review of your work. All of this helps to demonstrate to supporters that you're a safe pair of hands. Use every opportunity to sell your professionalism or your team and the importance of the application to you. Handy hints time again. Always remember, use web links when you can, because you can't always, and it is worth checking, particularly with some digital applications. Provide links to background information. For instance, your LinkedIn page or your project's website or anything like that. Funders are interested in that sort of information, so they will check out your details, but remember to check that your links work. There's nothing worse than putting in links that are broken. Another handy hint, be consistent. Now, when you get onto more complex funding applications, this is really important, but simple things like if you're referring to particular types of workshops in your application, use the same title for those workshops throughout your application. Make sure it's the same title that goes into your budget for the costs against that, and make sure if you've done workshops like that in the past that your photographs are likewise appropriately labelled. Moving on to our 3 key questions again. So the importance of story, what you're asking for and what supporting materials you need to assemble. And question 3, as I say, this is a little bit of a catch-all, but what else do you need to know? Question 3, make it easy. I can't emphasize this enough. Really make it easy. A funder might have hundreds of applications to look through. They're stressed, they're tired, they're busy like the rest of us. So make sure you can read, you make it easy for them to read, to find, open and read all your documents. Remember that KISS theory from earlier, keep it simple, stupid. Develop good relationships. If you're successful, fantastic, go you. But remember, keep in contact with your supporters. The personal touch matters, so keeping a conversation going where appropriate. Tell them how good your project has been. Or if you're having difficulties, they might be able to help you. Go and speak to them. Let them know more than anything else how important their backing was to the project. And if they have asked to put their logos on things, remember to do that. You may be asked, you may be going to them for support again in the future. So being nice, being civil, being polite, being enthusiastic, I think are all important points. Another key one, and this is a really important lesson, don't be scared of rejection. You won't get funding from every ask you make, and that is okay. We all get turned down. Even the biggest and most professional organisations can put forward really rubbish funding applications. What you see as somebody applying is the other people who've been successful, but you don't necessarily see the people who've failed. As I say, they can be quite big organisations sometimes. But remember, if you don't ask, you won't get. And in most cases, even if you get a no, you can always ask again next time. Don't be scared of rejection. This again is quite a big one. Ensure that your fundraising is legal and ethical. It's really important that you're honest. Reputation is everything. Funders know that projects change, adapt and develop. However, if you are intentionally misrepresenting something, or putting false information into a funding application, that is fraud and could result in you getting into serious trouble. Now, obviously, most people are going into this with huge amounts of goodwill, and it's really important that you're not going to get rich through fundraising. But if things go wrong, you should always try and sort things out with a conversation with your funders first. However, if you do need advice, there are a couple of places you can go. Scottish fundraising standards panel are really good. I've not had much contact with the fundraising regulator in England, Wales or Northern Ireland, but I think most of these organisations will have some kind of arbitration process. Hopefully it'll never come to that, but the key thing is your reputation and making sure that you're happy with what you've done. So applications can be daunting, but get fundraising right and it can open up a world of possibilities for you and your projects. So just to go through that one more time, our 3 top questions. What do you want to do? What do you need? And what else do you need to know? In terms of your fundraising next steps, it really is go out there and do it. There aren't any set rules. you need to find an application and you need to start applying for things. You will learn, but unfortunately you learn by getting it wrong and making mistakes. So always ask for feedback. Even if you've been successful in a project, ask why you've been successful and learn from that. Every application is an opportunity to learn something, no matter what the outcome. And honestly, there's a lot of funders out there. This is just stuff off the top of my head. As I say, I'd recommend reading The Cash for Culture. If you go to Voluntary Arts, there's also a list of other funders out there on our website. I touched on this with Maggie. I think Dumfries and Galloway do a regional arts fund. I think that might be a starting point for lots of folk, but again, look at them, look at their criteria. Creative Scotland, again, an obvious one. The Scottish Council for Funding Organisations have a special fundraising platform called Funding Scotland. Pretty much everything is on there. Arts Council England, again, it's worth looking at. A lot of the national funders will be on there. And another obvious one is National Lottery and the Community Fund. Other things to look at, SCVO, Institute Fundraising, Arts Marketing Association, Directive of Social Change, and particularly those last two, if you're interested, they do free online workshops. Some of it's a little bit focused at arts administration, but there is certainly fundraising stuff amongst there. They're free, go and have a look. There's no cost to you. Might be quite a good use of your time. So, last thing to say is thank you. And I'll come out of our screen share and hopefully be able to deal with any questions, and we'll have an opportunity to look at your elevator pitches.
Well, thank you, Duncan. That was an extremely informative session. I completely, a lot of that kind of chimed with me, that because I started off a long time ago with small funding applications and made lots of mistakes. But that thing about doing your homework, knowing what you want to say, remembering to keep that passion in what you've got, but actually this relationship with funders before you even apply, I think that's a very good piece of advice. They do want to help, they do want to support. So that is, I would say, an important thing. And sometimes when you start off, you're frightened, you don't, think that you can do that. So a load of really, really good things in there. I also, it's that remembering the question, remembering what the funder, what each question is. I used to set up a separate Word document with each section and a bit at the top that reminded me all the way of what this section was about. My only word of caution is I was submitting a just under shy of 900,000 application to Big Lottery Scotland, and I left it to the day before to transfer the stuff. I had no sleep that night. I actually had a panic drive whilst doing things on my computer up to a support organisation. So don't leave things like that. You're editing, your proofreading and all to the last minute. I have to say I had a very happy ending, but I actually thought at one point I was going to expire through the night because I was so panicked by it. So leave time for that kind of thing.
I mean, I have to say it is a little bit of a lottery sometimes as to whether a funder is going to say, when they say 12 o'clock, do they mean 12 o'clock? And when I say that, let's just say 12 o'clock lunchtime. Some funders will offer some leeway, but they don't have to, and other funders don't. If you're 1 minute past 12, they're not interested. Although I have to say that most funding applications I take down to the wire, because there is something extra you want to add. There's always a little bit of tweaking. You can always make it better. At some point you have to walk away and say that's it, completed. But I suppose that's the same as writing any story. It's never quite right. You always want to add a little bit more. I don't know if there's any questions. Maybe we should look at that first of all. I don't know whether people want to hold up hands visually or hold up hands on screen, or if someone is stuff.
I've tried to unmute everyone. So anyone who needs to ask a question.
I'll find the link for Cash for Culture just as we're making this conversation, and I'll put it in the in the chat. So just to remember that you need to download the chat before the conversation ends, but I'm sure it'll be possible to circulate this as well.
I have a question.
So that's really good. That's really good background information there. Sorry, Sarah.
Thank you, Duncan. That was really great and clear. I feel like able to tackle one right now. But the question that always comes up is with the budget, like, how do you place a value on your time as the artist who's going to be doing it and as the one who's applying for the funding?
So the technical answer is that both the Scottish Artists Union and AN, which is a network in the north of England, produce guidance rates for artists. If you ask Creative Scotland, for instance, would say you should refer to the guidance rates for artists. They're optimistic, shall we say. That's not to say that you can't charge them, but they're at the high end. I suppose at the other end of this, basic minimum wage, I mean, even for administrative work, I would say that you should be paying basic minimum wage. And in Edinburgh, certainly I worked out what the basic minimum Edinburgh wage would be in the same way there's a London wage. And as I say, even for administrators, or administrative jobs, that's what I would be looking to pay. But there's probably a halfway house in between the two. In some ways, you as the artist will be expected to add some of your time in for free. And I'm afraid that's probably the harsh reality. But likewise, if all your time is for free, you're going to get burnt out and you're going to get frustrated because you're giving away your skills for nothing.
Yeah, no, that is the tricky bit, because if you do the union rate, which once upon a time was sort of 200 a day, which even these is not even that much when you're paying all your own national insurance and everything. But if you, on the basis that every project takes longer than you think it's going to, so if you start from knowing and being realistic about how long it will take, suddenly the budget that you're asking for is actually quite a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so there has to be a payoff. And I'm not going to give MD the advice that they should be working for free. I think that's a really important thing, but also you have to be realistic. I mean, as a ballpark, if somebody was asking me for a small community project to put in some, some professional time on a steering group, and they're willing to pay me, I would say $250 a day for my time, but that might in fact be half days, at $125, and then there's a little bit more control. That's a little bit more achievable for their budgets. This doesn't account for the value of your ideas. It doesn't account for the time when you're in the bath and you're thinking about it. So there isn't an easy answer. And some arts organisations have got into trouble, which is why Creative Scotland now says you should be paying union rates. But the reality is it doesn't happen, and it's a sad thing to see.
So what did you say were the things to look at for the rates?
Scottish Artists Union provide yearly, I haven't looked this year, but certainly in the past, they provide yearly rates. And there's another organisation called AN, which is short for Artist Newsletter. They work in the north of England, and they also publish guidance rates. But I've read reports going back as far as the early 80s that were saying that most artists are working for a third of their time is working for free or voluntary in some way, shape, or form. So I hate to say it's part of the sector because it shouldn't be, but it is an expectation.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else have any questions?
I actually have a question, Duncan. If you were applying to several funding organisations and you wanted to keep it simple, stupid, to let them see your fundraising plan, in that who you'd applied to, who had said yes or no, do you have a template? I mean, because that I could see that becoming, especially with figures involved, it becoming very confusing and messy. So is there a kind of template that you would recommend for that particular?
I guess that's two things. So I suppose that there's your budget, and your budget should be realistically how much your project's going to cost.
Mhm.
Within that, you might say this is the optimum project and this is the minimum project. So there might be two sets of figures, but you know, any more than that, it's going to get complicated. What I would put in as an appendix or as an additional bit of supporting material would be a fundraising strategy. And in that, you can list all the organizations who you could apply for, how much you're going to apply for, and you know what your hit rate is. As a rule of thumb, again, I'd probably be looking to apply to at least twice as many organizations as money that I need, possibly even 3 times as many organizations. The funding environment's changing just now as a lot of funders are looking towards COVID mitigation. And obviously, in terms of a case for need, that's really quite a powerful one. So it's difficult to say if it's just an arts project, for instance, that you're applying for, you know, what the success rate of that is likely to be. But certainly as a minimum, I'd be looking at applying to twice as many projects as money that I need. But if you put that in your strategy, it means that you've thought about it. It also means that you're not messing up your budget. And
I guess I also thought it might give weight to a funding application if you were showing what backing you'd already secured.
oh, absolutely, yes, yeah. So I mean, again, if you've already secured some money, that's great. That's a real confidence booster for any funder. And I guess in an optimum world, what you're doing is you're looking to secure a little bit of money, and from that little bit of money, you get a larger chunk, and from that combined, you can then go and start to really reach with that. You know, I know certainly one funder who would always look at putting in 10% from other sources before they went to speak to a funder. Now that might be from your own pocket, so to speak, or it might be in kind, or in kind might be additional to that. But if you can show you've got some money, then that's going to give another funder a lot of confidence that already somebody thinks that you're doing a good job, or you've written a good application, or you're ticking the right boxes. So as I say, it's risk mitigation for these guys.
I suppose referring back to Sarah's question, and you could actually put your own time in kind in there, couldn't you? I mean, that could be your contribution.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it all makes for a more balanced budget, which is what a funder's looking for. But again, also, there is a difference between support in kind and cold hard cash. Now, again, there isn't any guidance about how you make that balance, but obviously cold hard cash is going to be more appealing to a funder than if you've just said, oh, I've just worked for the last 3 months in this project and my time costs X. You know, that's a slightly more unquantifiable or unknown quality. But certainly saying that that you're going to spend this amount of time on the project and donate that time for free is all part of making your argument as to why the project's a good idea. Say, if you can get other people to buy in, then it becomes more appealing. It's not about what you think, it's also about what other people think.
And is there, in the language and world of funding applications, is there a particular way to lay out a funding strategy that is easily recognizable and not messy?
I mean, again, there's no cold hard rules for this. I think the first thing is make sure your document's labeled funding strategy.
Okay.
And take it from, you know, put it together in a spreadsheet if you're confident doing that, but then move that into a PDF, add a little bit of introduction to that, and a little bit of kind of chat afterwards about you know, how you've come to these figures, or you know, if you've already been successful with the funding application, you know, if there was any response for the funder. You know, if you could get a funder or a project participant to say, oh, this is a really good project and it's really needed, and have that in your funding strategy, you know, all of these start to layer up to make your case stronger and stronger.
Okay, thank you.
I would like to talk about in-kind contributions, actually. In my experience, what I've learned from hard lessons is that the best way to make an in-kind contribution is one that you genuinely know you can meet, and to avoid putting something down as an in-kind contribution that might actually end up with you feeling short in terms of actual physical cash for the project. So for example, we've just developed a project in another organization that I work with, and the in-kind contribution is the marketing and the social media and the web, because that we know categorically that has an assigned value to it, but also that we can deliver that and that we can afford to deliver that. So I would say be very careful about just putting your time down for in-kind. Make it very specific about what it is you can do for the project, because I think that looks better. And that was a Creative Scotland bid, so they certainly preferred that. I hope that's helpful.
So again, I mean, just to kind of reiterate that, I mean, particularly when you get onto organisational funding, what organisations don't have is lots of cash swirling around. What they do have is the resources in terms of people's time. So if you're making a funding application, aligning some of people's time against that is a key element. But that's a great tip. I mean, again, you know, a professional rate of 250, 350 a day for you know, somebody who's going to do the marketing for you. You don't necessarily have to say that it's you that's going to do that marketing, but it's a nice assignable task that you can then you know, put into your budget. The key thing there is saying that you've got a line for budgeting and for marketing, and marketing is really important. Funders want people to know that they've funded your project and that your project's a really good thing. So, you know, again, that keeps everyone happy.
I have a tip that I don't know if it applies in Scotland, but I used to live in Iceland, where there's quite a long tradition of being able to ask businesses for sponsorship. And there they always said, like, ask for twice as much as you actually need, because people have a thing about, I don't know, it's like an innate haggling thing where they want to sort of, they'll give you half. It's like, okay, we'll give you half. So if you ask for double what you actually need, then you end up getting what you need. Yeah. So I don't know if your experience is the same.
My personal experience is it's about finding the manager of the company. You know, let's say there's a tire company, just to pick something at random. I wouldn't necessarily go and speak to their head office. I'd go in and see if I could have a personal conversation with the manager, and I'd try and suss out in that conversation, you know, what it is that they might want from that. I suppose that does come down to probably more modest sums at the end of the day. If you're getting commercial sponsorship for larger sums, you're right, the sponsors tend to want an awful lot of bang for their buck. My personal experience of kind of corporate fundraising, you know, is that effectively big companies want quite entertaining things for their staff to do. So if you can invite them to a gallery opening or a fashion show, they'll invite their board down, or they'll invite their managers down, and they'll give them some fizzy juice, and, you know, everyone's happy. But they don't necessarily want to pay through the nose for that. There's certain things, certainly, like, I mean, this is a different world we're talking about again, you know, actually really good catering makes a difference. So you could provide a venue, and if they want to do all the other stuff, then again, you're getting something without necessarily having to lay out a lot. But by their nature, commercial organisations are commercial. Unless they really like you, they're not going to be giving you tons of money for you know, very little work.
Mm-hmm.
But commercial funding in this country's and philanthropic giving, I mean, it's a massive sector. You know, most of the big medical charities, most of the kind of dogs, cat home type things, you know, that's their primary income. But it takes an awful lot of time to develop a relationship with individuals or with corporations who you then to go and say, can you now donate to me, you know, even something modest like £10,000. You know, big organizations have relationship managers whose job it is to wine and dine these people, so that when it does come to the ask, you know, they will be, you know, already in your pocket, so to speak. Certainly there's one commercial gallery, one big public sector gallery in Edinburgh, and I know the commercial manager there, and she says she reckoned it took about a year before they actually asked for money. So they'd invite people to the opening, to the pre-opening. You know, she would be there to talk to them, to show them around, introduce them to the artists. But they did all of that for a year before they said, "Oh, would you be interested in supporting our next show?" That's a lot of resources for a small organisation to put forward, and actually maybe going and speaking to the person who runs the baker, the cake shop, or the person who runs the off license, and saying, you know, what you do as a deal is a more pragmatic way forward.
Sensing that maybe question time is over, and might it be elevator pitch? David, do you want to help?
Oh yes, I almost forgot. Oh, I'm looking forward to this. So I think Fiona's having to quit out early.
Yeah, he's got to go.
Is that leaving us down? So shall I pick someone? I don't know. Is everyone happy to do this?
Sure.
No.
Margaret's shaking her head, which
No.
me think we should ask Margaret.
No.
Tell us what you've got first of all, Margaret. We don't have to be. This was just a bit of fun, so don't feel too pressured.
Okay, so this is an imaginary one. Okay, the name of the project is Cotter Bairns, and it's an art project. So many of my relatives in the past were farm workers, and I'd like to tell the story of life of the Cotter Bairns from as far back as I can get, which would mean interviewing old photographs and then making artwork to tell this story.
Lovely, really nice. I want to know what Cotter Bairns, what that means. Tell me that.
Well, obviously the farm workers stayed in the cottages, and that's the cotters. So
yeah.
If you were a farm worker's child, you were a Cotter Bairn.
Yeah, okay, yeah, lovely. Yeah, I mean, see, I'm already engaged. I want to know more.
Maybe I'll make it a project.
Well, you definitely sold me. I want to know more.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, Scots is such a lovely, rich tongue. You know, it's a great way to get people hooked on an idea, and then they want to ask more questions. Amy, I don't know if I can pick on you. Is that fair? Do you feel like
Sure. I've got a semi-imaginary one. I'm a student at Dumfries and Galloway College doing the HND in Art and Design. So this year for an end of year exhibition, we have decided it's going to have to be online rather than organise a physical exhibition and then perhaps have to cancel. So we've now agreed on the name of it. It's going to be called the Galloway Line.
Yep, the old railway line.
And for the Galloway Line, the name conjured up kind of old 1930s rail travel posters to me. And I suddenly thought, wouldn't it be a great idea if, in addition to the online exhibition, we could somehow have a touring taster exhibition on board the train? And of course, there is no Galloway Line from Dumfries to Stranraer anymore. But if we could convince the train company to give us unlimited travel, we could go the long way round from Dumfries to Glasgow to Stranraer and back again. And with connections being good, it would probably only take 8 or 10 hours.
I like that. The long way round as well might be quite a nice little tagline for that. Great. So I was going to say ScotRail do a fund. ScotRail have a cultural fund.
So I would be asking for unlimited travel for the members concerned, the students concerned, and also for some exhibition space within their carriages, whether we could block off windows and have like a taster exhibition for a week or 2 weeks and do this. But at the same time, my important detail would be that it would raise awareness for the campaign for reopening the Dumfries to Stranraer rail line, which closed in 1965 and which currently has been gathering support. And again, that would be a great asset for tourism within the region.
I wouldn't necessarily funder if something was political, but I think as all actions are political, you know, that's the subplot, that's the subtext, and actually when you go and speak to other people, that's what you need to tell them. Great, lovely. Again, Irene, I don't know how you're feeling.
Me, yeah, fine. I'm a member of Moffat Crime Writers, and in the past we ran a one-day workshop, which was supported by DGU, and thanks to them for that, and also to the individual members within it who also have had funding for other projects they were doing. Very successful. It was very positive. We got some really good feedback on that one day, and would like now to do a weekend, possibly in a couple of years' time, so there's no great rush for it. But we'd like to have a writer's weekend. In particular, you know, what we're looking at is going out to people and saying, do you have that novel hiding inside you you want to get out? And in particular, we're looking at giving support to either low-waged or unwaged, to carers, to people who are discriminated against in other ways within society, who won't have the time or the space or the ability to basically just sit down and write, which is what we all want to do. So the idea would be to run workshops. What else I'm going to look at? Basically to provide the inspiration, the workshops and the tools for these people to start writing and to get out there and do some writing. I
like that, inspiration, workshop, tools. That's quite, again, that's quite a nice tagline.
Yeah, you can tell the writers.
Yeah, and particularly that you're you know, working with maybe less advantaged groups. I think there still needs to be a hook. You know, crime novels always have, you know, Murderer in the Orient Express, to pick a cheesy one, but there's a nice kind of title or a flow or a hook to that.
Yeah, if we can't write an elevator pitch, we should be shot. That's our job. So,
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I'll get the rest of them onto it. Do something with that.
And Sarah, I hope you don't mind. I don't know if you wanted to contribute something.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So mine is called Rainfall Fell, a cultural commemoration of the floods. So the story Rainfall Fell is an 8,000 word creative nonfiction essay detailing of floods of 2015. And I wish to print, bind and install it on the fell in which the story takes place to commemorate the flood's 5th anniversary, so that hikers can come on it and read it in place, because so far it's only been published online. And so this pitch would be to a paper mill that's on the river that flooded. So I'm looking for sponsorship of waterproof paper stock and printing and binding services so that the book is made using the water from the river that flooded, so that it's a
local,
place-based. Yeah.
Lovely, very nice. Yeah, I mean, when you said that it was, you know, to be displayed on the moor, that's the real, that's different, that's unusual. You know, you're going to get walkers, you're going to get hikers, you're going to get people who perhaps wouldn't normally exercise going to go and have a look at it. I mean, it broadens your net out. Different people you might be able to go and ask for support for your project. I'd say there's definitely a really nice local strand and a health and well-being strand within that that's really really interesting.
Okay, great.
Fab, you're all funded. I've lined up your programme for the next year, I think.
Excellent.
Can I ask one quick question? Duncan, you mentioned that ScotRail have a cultural fund.
Yeah.
Do you know of a source or a list of the big companies who actually officially have funds and who are open to receiving applications? I mean, I know I'd heard about the ScotRail. I know Tesco does it, but is there somewhere where there's a resource with all the company names?
So the best funding resource I've come across is the one that the Scottish Council for Voluntary Organisations do. You can go through that and you know, filter your choices. and ultimately it's not everything, but there's the vast majority of things are on there. You know, put in a day and you know, come out with a spreadsheet with 200 potentials. In terms of commercial sponsorships, that's less harder because they don't necessarily have those kind of open avenues. A really sneaky way to go around that, however, is to go on most exhibitions, most big institutions. You know, I'm thinking of the V&A in Dundee has a list of patrons online. So go through the list of patrons and Google every single one of them.
That's a really good idea.
It does get a little bit stocky at some point, so do check yourself. But if you're wanting to find the ones that people don't talk about on you know, kind of more public spaces, then that's the best way.
Cool, thank you.
Just going to actually now hand over to Tabby to wrap up. But thank you all. It's been really fantastic and great to hear all your ideas. Really, really lovely ideas. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Yes, and I want to say thank you to Duncan. Thank you, Duncan. We'll give you a round of applause because that was really good and extremely helpful. We will send you Duncan's presentation out so that you can all receive that, because we've got your details from your registration. And what was there something else we needed to send them apart from that? Oh yes, the PDF of the booklet that Duncan mentioned. I've downloaded it, so I've got that, so I can send that to you all as well. I believe there will be hard copies, so maybe there'll be a way for Maggie to send a hard copy out to whoever would like one. So really, it's just to say thank you very much for coming and joining us for this session this afternoon. Please remember to complete your feedback questionnaire. That's really helpful for us so that we can communicate to our lovely funders, Creative Scotland, and let them know how this is all going. So if you would do that, we would very much appreciate it. And that's it. Thank you so much for being with us. And thank you again, Duncan. You were fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Folks, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye then.
Bye, Irene. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yay!
Here we go.
Well done. That was great.
That's us.
Yeah.
I'll stop recording